Good evening, it is Cinco de Mayo. It's May 5th, 2022. It is 4:00 p.m. and this is a meeting of the Policy Committee of the West Bend Joint School District Number 1. Notification of this meeting has been posted. Superintendent, can you confirm this meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it was.
Why don't we stand for the pledge? I'd like you to stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. As I said, this is a policy committee meeting tonight where our agenda is to review policies in the 300 series, which is in the instruction series. We have board member John Donaldson here tonight, board member Chris Swigert, and I'm Joel Pondert, Superintendent Wimmer, Dr. Joel Reese, and Assistant Superintendent Laura Jackson. Do we need to approve the agenda? I think we do. I will make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion to approve the agenda again, which is the review of the 300 series instruction policies. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
It's just the two of you, he's not official like that.
Aye. Okay. Any opposed? There's none opposed. So Mr. Donaldson is certainly a sworn-in member of our school board at this point, but in the next couple of weeks, we will talk about committees and officially vote on committees. So I think what you're saying is at this point, Mr. Swigert and I are the policy committee for right now.
Correct.
I think, John, you've expressed interest in being in this, on this committee, so I appreciate that. Thank you for being here tonight. So that's why Mr. Donaldson abstained from voting tonight. So we'll turn it over to you, Superintendent.
Exactly, I would have explained that as well. So thank you to Mr. Donaldson, who is one of our newest members of the board and expressed interest. And we formally discuss different committees, positions in the board at our main meeting, and then take formal action at the end of the month. So until then, he's in his unofficial capacity, but certainly jumping in because this will be that first full series that he would be part of in committee and then taking forward to the board as well. So again, thanks for giving your time and getting up to speed.
Sorry, Superintendent, to interrupt, but it's a good reminder that really members of the public are invited to attend if they wish, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been clipping along, reviewing policies. Recall at our last meeting, we finalized the 500s. Those will come forward on the May agenda starting on Monday. And now it's time to dig into the 300s. And let me tell you, this was a delightful series in that it was the most up-to-date that we've tackled thus far. So everything was really relevant, recent. The 300 series handles instruction, and there's quite a few policies. For tonight, I have about 22 policies to go through, no significant changes, but I'll dive into that. People following along at home, I attached that as a PDF. They're certainly found on our website in the 300 series, and you can see all of them. But then that PDF will show you what I'm hoping to go through for discussion tonight. And it's about halfway through. I plan on at least probably 3 sessions together talking about the 300 series. Okay, so without further ado, the very first one is currently labeled 310. It's around our philosophy and educational goals, and it notes our mission, vision, core values, guiding philosophy for the district, as well as some educational goals. I would ask that you consider renumbering this to 110 district mission. We currently don't have a 110 or district mission on file. I think this more aptly fits the overall philosophy for the entire district and is representative of that. So not changing any of the content, just aligning that number.
That would seem to make sense. It's also kind of earlier in the series, so if someone's starting at the beginning and working their way down, this would seem to be a good one to have it toward the top.
A foundational piece for our district, certainly. The next one I'd like to have a little discussion regarding is 311. 311 in the naming convention does not seem to match. It's around academics, so I'm thinking this might be some policy that we have written. You can see May 8th, 1972 for reference. That's the exact birthday that I have, so do the math, I turned 50 on Sunday. So again, you know, knowing it was May 8, 1972, it might be some old language. When I looked at this, it was talking about the different courses of study, the reviewing curriculum, those pieces. Those concepts appear a little bit later, and then teachers' role in that work also appear in some of our evaluation pieces, such as that. I think it was just something that we looked at and kept kind of rolling forward. So I really entertain discussion if we think this is necessary to have this.
The board asks the staff to maximize student achievement in each learning environment, use systematic and valid methods to assess student learning, communicate student achievement clearly, using personal contact as well as available technology. To me, if you aren't doing that, then you shouldn't be working here, so.
It's really part of the required evaluation process, and then there's other pieces, but also too, it almost, the way the language read for me, it appeared and could be misinterpreted that every teacher is an island that does all these things in isolation of themselves, and perhaps outside of the scope of the district curriculum and expected instructional practices. So I wouldn't want anyone to misinterpret that. That they have that sole responsibility as well. So again, I believe it's covered, as we said, in evaluation pieces and some content throughout the series. So any questions about that or anything you'd like me to dig into further in this language or?
So this is recommended for deletion.
I would recommend this for removal. I fear that some of the language is pretty nebulous, could be misinterpreted, and it's stronger in other areas.
It seems basic, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But then I look at it in the sense of policy and standard and holding individuals accountable to it. It doesn't necessarily appear as measurable or definitive either. And so if it includes concepts that are covered in other areas, then we should keep it simple. We wouldn't need to have this.
There's policies around curriculum development, assessment, around standard approval. That, you know, that's the work of the board. And not individual teachers. So, okay, then I'll move forward with that recommendation for removal. The next piece, although again, a lot of work clearly done on my birthday. The annual school calendar, days and hours of instruction. This has been updated. It is in conjunction with most recent practice. Again, there's no recommendation on this policy at all.
This is last reviewed in 2019. Looks good, current.
Yeah, one of the significant things, you can tell it's been updated. We went from days of instruction. We used to have so many days to more hours and minutes and a little bit more flexibility in calendar development. So this is just showing our commitment. Also the caveat of, things could change, but that's through action of the board, so it gives us that flexibility too. And again, we're a district who creates calendars 2 years at a time for families for planning purposes. So again, no recommendation here. There was an AR that was labeled 322 AR, administrative rules. Again, for audience, AR is an administrative rule. Those are pieces that the administrative team might create in supplement to a policy. As I have done every time we kind of kick off one, I review both the policy and existing ARs. This is an AR, it's not connected to any policy that continues to exist. And it's just talking about expectations for student arrival. Those are really handbook topics. I would sunset this one. So remove it and then just, again, ensuring that relevant information is in student handbooks.
To kind of relocate to the student.
Yeah, it's currently in there, but it's talking about getting a pass, things of that nature. It's not policy level.
The AR is obviously up to the
Administrators.
team, so that won't come up for votes or anything. That is up to you.
Correct. The next one is a mix. It's 323.2. It's blending a unique policy. I believe it's our own language around representation in classrooms of the flag and offering the Pledge of Allegiance or national anthem to our students. And then it's commingled with 323.1, is the special observance days, and you can see there's some language around observances. So again, 323.2, that's a unique number. It kind of commingles those two concepts. I have no recommendation on this policy. It's part of our current practice. There are, the state helps designate days of observation, and they just recently notified that they'll start formally recognizing September 11th. Our schools certainly had recognized that in the past, didn't need to be told, but they have added that as a formal observance day.
And the first paragraph of that, I just checked it,
Mhm.
recites verbatim the requirements in section 11806, so
Correct.
that's fine. At first I would say, well, if it's in there, do we need to include it in here? But I think this is one that's fundamental. I think it's a good one to acknowledge.
Yeah, I think it was, as we said, we certainly always follow state statute, so I think it was just, as you said, a piece of commitment and statement publicly. They might come to us in policy before they go to the statute to see that that is certainly part of our practice.
86.
The next is 330. It's standards aligned and goal-based curriculum development. This is what I talked about, the board's work in adopting standards. This, again, you can kind of see that it's certainly not representative of 1972 language. This is the most recent language from WASB. You can see it was reviewed in 2019. And it just talks about specifically, I would renumber the policy 310 since we talk about goals set forth in that policy if we sunset that. So we would make that change to it. But the rest is really talking about the work of the board in adopting standards. You adopt those annually. Your first meeting of the board is July. We adopt those and we send out notice to our families and we post that publicly. It talks about employing continuous improvement process, how we develop courses, any kind of changes, those pieces. There's also supplementary information right behind it as an administrative rule that delves a little bit deeper into process. So again, with the exception of just updating with that reference to that policy, I have no recommendation for change.
Good.
Okay. The next one is an AR. Again, we'll make sure that that is updated. We'll go ahead and administratively change that. It should be 330 AR in connection with the policy that we just read versus a 330.1. And it's just delving a little bit deeper into that process. Okay. Like I said, it's 3 pages worth of delving into a little bit deeper on process. The next one technically might be labeled special curriculum projects. I see that we've called it experimental programs. I'm not sure why or when. This has been around since 1980. I don't have any issue or concern if that's common language and people understand that that means that something is new. It's experimental. It might be an innovation. But it just talks about that needs to have some vetting through the curriculum and instruction committee, that it has to have a process that meets expectations regarding statute guidelines, and that no one is required to participate in a program that's deemed experimental, or if we're trying something out for a while, that we would make sure and provide notice and give families the opportunity to determine what they'd like to do with that.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't have time to look. Is this a WASB policy?
In WASB, there's some pieces, they didn't have a template per se on it, but it talks about what they would call special curriculum projects. And it's just while something's under review or you're looking at putting it in, it appears to have started from something perhaps homegrown with our district and then morphed.
And sorry, I mean to cut you off. I like the theme of this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not keen on the wording of it.
Yeah.
When I see
Or the instruction committee. We don't-
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Well, and also I think I know where it's going, and but like I said, I like the theme, but innovative curricular or instructional programs, I'll call myself a layperson, I'm not sure what that means. because I think we like to be innovative in various things, and instructional programs, gee, that sounds like regular school, and so these may be terms of art in the educational world, and if that's the case, then I'd feel better about it. But I just looked at this and thought, yeah, I like the direction that it's going, but I'm just not sure about the wording, so I'd appreciate administration's feedback on it.
Why don't we look at it and do some tweaks and then send it to WASB while there's no specific template around that construct. Again, they're always willing to review some of our language. We'll talk through some of that and ask for some tips and then bring that one back for discussion at the next time we meet.
Sounds good. I guess the other question I have is this a policy that historically in the last 1, 3, 5 years that we've relied heavily on? We haven't really talked much about it. I'm not saying that means we shouldn't get rid of it, that we should keep it or get rid of it, but it's not come up that often, I
Yeah,
guess.
no, we haven't relied heavily on it as you, should we, if we were, previously, before we adopted the Bridges math curriculum, we did pilot multiple math series over a period of time, and that would have been an example of when we utilized this policy.
Helpful, thank you.
Piloting potential new curriculum. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can see that.
Yeah, you could pilot lessons out of something, you could pilot a unit study, the kind
Gather
of try it out,
feedback
see.
from teachers and
Mhm.
buildings and outcomes.
The other thing that comes to mind is we recently just did a trial with some digital tools. And so we had some teachers do a short trial, we had a few students do a short trial, but we didn't do anything long-term. Particularly for this reason, making students participate in something that's not approved or taking them down a rabbit hole kind of piece.
Same with Chris, I can understand the policy being in place, the wording since 2009 probably needs to be updated
Mhm.
a bit, maybe clarify
Yeah.
what exactly it means, a pilot program, does it have to be approved by the board? This is board instruction committee, does that mean our
Committee can carry it, or,
committee can carry it, which our committees have no power to carry anything, so I imagine that should say the Board of Education, but, or the school board, but, I can see why that would be there, but, probably needs to be worded differently.
we'll do some work around this one, provide some clarity and kind of examples and more definitive terms, and then get a consult on it, and then bring it back forward in the next committee discussion.
Thank you.
Perfect. That next one is an AR that goes with it, so when we clean up that, if we've got any recommends, we'll bring them both together for you to look at, to see how they might complement each other. The next one, 333, we currently have it labeled parent rights and district programs activities. I think that we should utilize the full title that WASB uses, because I think it really shapes more meaning. It's parent rights in relation to district programs and activities and student privacy. And all those pieces are contained in this. So the language was used by WASB, but that title was truncated. And I'm not sure why specifically, but I think the broader title actually lends itself to clarity for a reader if they were looking for something. So that's my only recommendation, is to clean up that title.
Makes sense.
And again, all those pieces were in there. It talks about, again, surveys around all those, again, no change since the last time we reviewed. There's a supplementary piece with that I just would call your attention to. I think one of the things that parents, especially as they get older, and you might see in our news, we're talking about human growth and development right now. The next AR really talks about the notification, the opt-out opportunities, and how we notify families of that. And it's really specific to human growth and development and our commitment to making sure we're communicating with families around exactly what their kids are learning or not learning in many cases, and then that they have the opportunity to opt out. So that's got some clarity around it. And again, that's an AR that we would continue. The next is 335, intellectual property, and it's the direct development of curriculum materials. Again, this represents the most recent language. It was last revised in just 2019, really looking at patents, the ability, who owns what, especially when employees are on the job and creating things, and that we have those pieces. So again, no changes recommended to that one. The next is the K-12 reading program in WASB. The title is actually reading instruction. I don't have any concern about changing this title. It's something that's been held, and I think it's easily understandable for our public. There are no changes. It represents most recent legal language in addition to our philosophy around literacy. We will make sure, some of them we were cross-checking some of the legal references when I was doing that work. We'll cross-check those. I'll put those on a separate list if we have to formally revise those, because I'm doing even just a legal statute update. So I'll make sure and cross-list those for us as well. The next is our own policy, 341.252. It would be, yeah, it's labeled correctly. I would say we picked a good number for it. It's sitting in the CTE strand, but it speaks to, some people don't know that we have a comprehensive auto program, and we do repairs in our on-site auto shop at the high school. Our students also recently placed in a competition. So it's just looking at that, and it's the keeping the liability waiver and all of those pieces. So again, I can see a formatting thing. There's the B is kicked out, but it's around vehicles. It might be family vehicles, staff, or vehicles owned by the district, or instructor selected vehicles for instructional purposes. Our partners in the area donate vehicles for our students to work on. From different dealerships, et cetera. So again, it's just kind of formalizing the liability waiver in those pieces. So I have no recommendation on that one. This is a random AR. Again, we will remove this AR. It's sitting randomly as 341.33. There is no supplement policy to go with this. It actually, everything about it is in wellness, and that's going to be in the 458 wellness policy. So those concepts and those pieces go into that policy and our practice over there. So we would just be sunsetting this as a 341 random AR. And that policy, that wellness policy, is actually guided by the state. You have to have certain components. So I can see them reflected in here, but that's sitting over there. When we get to the 400 series, we'll show you those pieces.
Halfway through.
I know, that's why I said, I'm like, the 300 series is really up to date. So instruction of students with disabilities, that's 342.1. There's a couple pieces. So this is an overarching policy. There's also, it represents the most recent language available, but also then there's procedural manuals and other state pieces that supplement this work, but it's just talking about overall providing instruction in kind of relation to federal state statutes. Okay. The next one is independent educational evaluation. That should actually be number 342.11. It is reflective of the most recent language. It just needs to have the appropriate number. So an independent educational evaluation, perhaps we've done some evaluation to determine if there's a disability or something that we need to wrap around, or the potential for our 504, which is another type of plan. This is really just talking about the ability to have an independent educational evaluation. So if the family wants to supplement, or if we're in conflict with perhaps findings, this lays out the procedure for them to pursue an independent education evaluation. It's something we do in conjunction with the state. So this helps guide that process. So no recommendation other than the appropriate number. The next one is 342.3. It's gifted and talented education. Again, the technical name would be gifted and talented program. I don't care one way or the other around, I think that's understanding, making it clear language around any kind of gifted and talented services that you might be looking at. So it really takes you from identification to working with and developing a plan to meet the needs of a child. It is reflective of the most current language. What I would think that we want to do is the AR that follows is walk through that, and I would like to see some updates to that piece over the summer, but the policy is sound. I have no recommendations for that.
Could I just suggest that we change,
Yeah.
the response to intervention model? We currently use the term multi-tiered system of support instead of response to intervention. So it's just a language tweak there in the label of how we go about that.
Perfect. I'll add that. So that would be that change there. Does anyone have any strong feelings around gifted and talented education or program, since we're making a change?
I mean, my recollection is this is actually a policy that I seem to remember when it was last reviewed or when it was adopted, that garnered a lot of discussion. And so I know a lot of thought went into it then. And I see no need for changes other than the ones we described.
Yep, perfect.
And we did use that label in the AR, so then the two will match.
Perfect.
John, we'll just stop because we're kind of halfway through. So an AR stands for administrative rule. And so like this is a good example where 342.3 is the policy, which we as a board adopt from WASB. And often from WASB, but we can make our own policies, we can revise them, whatever. The AR follows, so 342.3-AR is how the administration is going to carry out that policy. So we approve the policy, and then not every policy has an AR, but this one happens to, and some of the ones we've gone through happen to. And they write that. Now that cannot contradict the policy. We set the policy, they may put an AR out there. So anyway, my point is we don't vote on the AR. We don't really have any input into an AR as long as it does not contradict the policy that we adopt. So just
This is kind of we the board adopt the policy, administration identifies procedures that administration will use to follow the policy or execute the policy.
So again, that's a piece I know I've talked with those who support and oversee the program. I'll look for an update to the AR and our practice, most likely over the summer.
May I backtrack?
Yeah.
So in 330.1, I noticed if we're changing language,
Mhm.
that policy has chief academic officer
Oh,
listed
thank
all
you.
over it. And so we just wanted that change.
Perfect.
you're going back to 330.1.
Right, I'm like, where were you in the
Now we're
30?
going backward.
I saw it,
Got it.
I know we were actually changing the language pieces like that, so I didn't say anything, but then before I said, well, I'll go back.
There we go.
No, that's good.
We'll take care of it.
Consistency and titles, and then
Yeah.
that is important.
I've been watching the school board pieces.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Board of Education versus the school board.
What's nice is we have a comprehensive style guide in the beginning that really lays out like what font you're using, what the indent, and when we go through and get them loaded into board docs, because right now they're just sitting discreetly on the website. As we use that, we kind of get those pieces. I'm like, I can't see. So we clean up those pieces as well.
Perfect. Good catch.
All right, 342.5. Title I program, again, recently reviewed in 2019. It's representative of the most recent language. And then no recommendations for change there. Any questions on that one? Perfect. The next one is a comprehensive recommend for change. You can see I've stamped it with the word draft. This represents completely new language. The current policy follows it. It's 342.7. It's services for English language learners. Again, in parentheses, I've noted new. I've stamped it with draft. This was updated language from WASB from 2020. You can see our last review is in 2019. Laura took some time to review those two pieces, thought there was, it lent itself to better clarity in the new one. So I'll give everyone a moment.
This is one of those that is heavily legislated, thank you.
No problem.
And obviously, WASB puts those out for a reason. That's why we subscribe to the policy manual guide. And who am I to say that this policy is not worded correctly, in my opinion? I mean, maybe Chris can pull that, but I certainly can't. But,
That's
I mean,
okay.
it's-
We've got some
it's heavily
content here,
legislated.
yeah.
It's non-discrimination. It's bilingual programs, you know, that are required by the legislature. So
Right. Is this one that, I'm saying it has to or doesn't, does this have an AR backing it as well? Or do we stand on the policy?
We would stand on policy on this. There's certainly practices around serving students. I don't even know, let me look. I've made note of everything that is or isn't required. It's a recommended policy, so I want to have something, or this one is required for English language learners. The next one is a recommendation. So you have to have something in place, but again, I think it's pretty clear. Our staff who provide these services are also in communication with families. Families don't have to, who receive these services, don't have to lean on policy to navigate what that looks like for their child. It's just a foundational piece for us.
Yeah, after reviewing the proposed one, the proposed language, I have no objection to anything in there. And I think Joel, where you were going to is, you know, we subscribe to WASB for a reason. And part of it is to help us make sure that as laws change, because this is such a heavily legislated area, that we're in better stance to comply with those legal changes going forward. So in a case like this, I think going with the WASB language would be advisable.
Then that would mean a removal of the current and then adoption of the new updated language. The next is instruction of students with disabilities or Section 504 plans. So that really gets into that free and appropriate public education, which I believe should be capitalized to show that acronym there. It's around obligations to meet the needs of students with disabilities, and it gets into the legal and technical pieces of that, kind of lays out some service. Now, this is certainly a complex topic, and there's other procedural manuals that really support this piece. This is just, again, a policy that we would want to have on file. It's recommended. I don't recommend any change in this, but know that there's a lot of supplementary information that comes out in a student services manual around special education and its supports.
Okay.
Again,
Good.
no recommendation for changing the language. You can see there's an AR that follows it. I think that should be removed, and we should check our most recent procedural manual. The procedural manual is something that we go over and then we formalize the updates from DPI, et cetera. I wouldn't want this piece to be hanging out there and have two competing pieces. We'll double check that our current procedural manual has all of these and sunset this AR, and then perhaps make a reference or a link to that for more information C, so that they could see that there. But again, this feels competing to that supplementary document to me. Any questions about that? Again, I would just want to make sure for our public, a link to like, oh, here's where you can find out more, or here's who you would connect to. The next is 343.2. It's on class size. Again, most recently reviewed in February of 2020. What you like around this is that it's flexible, it's generic enough, it doesn't lock you into something. It really talks about a minimum to enroll and run a class. And I have the authority in this policy to grant approval for something less than 18. Let's say we were starting up a program, there's 15 kids in it, I can run it, it's run by a grant or something like that. We look at those pieces, or kids need this one final capstone class, I happen to fall short on enrollment, I might authorize that piece. It doesn't mean I'm gonna go around running classes with 10 kids in them all the time, but there's certainly that degree of authority here that we can look at and think about it. One piece around class size is, and I was working with Lenny, the board sees class size, projected class size, starting in December. You see it with the enrollment projections. You see it when you formally take action in January on the seats that will be available through open enrollment. And then you do preliminary approval of projected class size in your staffing plan, which came forward in April. So even though there's the policy and it might feel like, oh, it doesn't say like our classes are, and I ran our averages, we're anywhere from 21 to 24 in our elementary grades, and then right around 26 in our other grades. You certainly have some classes like a band where you're pulling kids to do a full band, and they might have a teacher plus an assistant, and you're running a comprehensive band of 35 students, that kind of thing. So that certainly happens, but again, there's board action and checks and balances along the way around what projected class size will be and what that turns out to be. So you see that along the way as well.
Is this a WASB required, recommended, offhand policy?
No, it's not required or recommended, but it is nice to have something general, because I think that's one of the largest pieces. Like I might get that from a parent, like, oh, I'm wondering about this class size, and they might be worried, like, should class size be 20? Should it be this? And and they're looking, do we have this? And then you can talk them through. It's like, oh, here's our range, here's the why. We drive that down to smaller class sizes, certainly for our earliest learners. There might be instructional supports in our elementary schools. There might be paraprofessionals in classrooms alongside our earliest learners. So there's technically a certified teacher plus paraprofessional. Or we might look at a class and go, wow, there's 27 kids in this class, and I don't want to open up a whole new section that costs salary and benefits for 2 kids. I might then allocate some additional support staff time there so that there's full-time support. So it gives us that flexibility to look at each situation uniquely. And I know we had some situations this year where we had like a class size with around 27 or so, and struggled to get consistent support in there because of labor shortages, that kind of thing. But we do have that in place.
And the minimum can be, exceptions can be made. I mean, if you have a class where you have 5 kids in a Spanish 8 class or something, I don't know, but a minimum can be.
So the minimum right here is set at 18, but it gives me authority to look at that. I look at that a little bit higher, or I might start looking at pathways for something like that. So again, you'd see some of that in the staffing report if we were looking at those pieces. But let's say I had, as you use Spanish, and I've got these kids who are on this track doing that, I might find another pathway for them. Maybe it's not, here, brick and mortar, maybe there's a virtual option, maybe it's a blended class around language, maybe it's, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So we would look for opportunities for kids to take a course, but yeah, as you said, it wouldn't be responsible of us to run a class with just 5 kids, but we would try and find an opportunity. And what's really nice in, I always lean on and highlight our partnership with the neighbors around when you're looking for opportunities for students. I don't have enough students to run agriculture. But blended between West Bend and Kewaskum holds the agriculture class for us. We host the construction class, and then our kids move between the two districts seamlessly to take advantage of those. So again, we just try and find opportunities for students to create programs. But again, this gives us the flexibility that we need for class size. You don't want to, in policy, put, yep, it's this number, and right after that, if you go up by one, like whole new section opens, that kind of thing, so. But it's something we monitor, and we monitor, especially leading up to that school year. Like I said, you'll see it preliminary staffing wise, and then you'll see if we trip into anything. The board also authorizes every contract we give. So if all of a sudden we have a new section, you would be approving that. But then we monitor heavily leading into school if we've got any hot spots to look at allocations. But that's how the board would stay involved and have actual action items associated.
Great.
The next is 343.44. It's part-time open enrollment. Again, recently reviewed May 2020. It's representative of the most recent changes. The only thing I would do is probably kick over, there's some centered titles in there, and we don't center our titles. We left justify in our format, so I would do that. But other than that, the content would remain. If you want to be technical. So again, recently reviewed, representative of most recent recommendations and current practice. The next one is 343.45. It's labeled as Start College Now program. The technical title includes technical college course program in parens after it. I recommend we add that so it has clarity for the reader that it is around technical college. While we might know what Start College Now is, so another reader might not understand that nuance. So I would add that parens. Other than that, it was recently reviewed. The content, again, I justify that centered title in there. Other than that,
Good.
I have no further recommendation.
Good.
Okay. The next one is Early College Credit Program, 343.46. Again, I justify the centered title, but it was reviewed May in 2020. It represents recent language as well as current practice. No recommendation further.
Okay.
The next one is Charter School Establishment. It was adopted in 2011. It was last revised January 6th of 2020. Perhaps Laura can lend. This number is not technically accurate. This number is actually specific to virtual schools and online learning environments. So I would recommend we just tweak that number so it's not in conflict with an existing number somewhere. I don't know, and maybe Laura can speak to, or maybe some of you can speak to, kind of the context of the policy. It follows, if you were starting a charter school, that's really in state statute, and we'd have to follow those things. So I'm not sure of some of the why on having this or why it was.
So the policy came into place in 2011 when the district was starting a twofold things. One, there was some exploration of charter schools, and they were starting the virtual program, which is not a charter school.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, the board and the administration serving at that time really felt it was necessary to have a process in place for how one would petition the school board in order to open a charter that's an instrumentality of the district. And so,
But I'm just going to clarify, instrumentality of the district means that it falls under, it might have its own charter governance, but it falls under the district umbrella. So the board then oversees that, and it's a district sponsored. So again, you wouldn't want a competing secondary entity to all of a sudden try and open a charter with us. We'd want to have that as an instrumentality or under our umbrella. Charters are used or developed for unique programmings. When you have charter status, you can use that designation to waive yourself out of a lot of mandates around hours of instruction, around curricular pieces, around assessment, around all of that. So you're leveraging that. And also kind of probably back when this was first developed, there was significant dollars at the state level for the development of charters. In the former district, we developed in-house charters. You might have a school within a school is what we called it, or a standalone. Part of developing a STEM school, part of a creative arts school, part of a engineering college, a medical program. So you might choose charter routes to access more funding and to work around those things, so.
And then in 2020, we just revised the language to be aligned with, if I am recalling correctly, with the DPI processes for the opening of a charter. And we left it to be broad, so it was any charter, not just virtual charters.
So this is not a WASB policy, this is a homegrown policy.
So,
You've checked WASB recently.
I mean, this doesn't exist like this. The 343.5 is literally around virtual. So this doesn't stand. Again, it looks like we just kind of created and aligned it to expected practice with DPI and statute and made it, as you said, a little bit broad.
And I think part of it, at the time, there was a desire to have it out there so that the public could see we had an established policy on developing a charter school. And so.
It's aligned with what the expectation is. I would just renumber it so it's more reflective.
What do you renumber it to though?
I would fall under, I would put something 343.51, something of that nature, because 0.5 is around virtual stuff. What we could do is bring the virtual one to you to look at that. Again, that's looking at more setting it up as a school. Reminder, we use our virtual as a program. It's not a standalone school. And don't see that as a need right now, so we're fine that way.
Does this policy somewhat protect the board from, like you said, the competing entities, or not really?
Not really, everyone that falls under statute.
So being a resident of West Bend, when this was adopted, I can tell you why this was adopted. And it was adopted when the community was considering charter schools. And there wasn't a policy in place until April 1st of 2011, and the board at the time wrote this policy. So I guess
It's completely aligned with what the statute would say, what DPI would say, what the expectation if you were to go through the process. It's not out of alignment. So it's totally fine to have this policy. There's no,
So it's harmless?
yep, it's no issue with it. We would have followed those things. It, as you said, maybe if the public were looking or thinking about it, it's great because again, they might come to us first under policy and not necessarily statute. However, I would just renumber it, tweak that number a little bit so it's just got that clarity, and people who are familiar with that system won't see it as being in competition with what it is
with virtual
intended to be.
schools, yeah.
Mhm.
That's fine. I mean, so first of all, if the number is wrong, then
Fix
let's
it.
renumber it.
Right,
And if the policy is in line with statute, I see section 118.40.
which I'm looking at right now, and and it hadn't tied every single word, but you can see the elements and the pieces there. I guess I'm okay keeping this as well. It is something to think about in the future around, well, if there's more detail actually in the statute, which is not surprising.
Right.
And we just want to be sure that it's not in conflict. Looks like it's okay.
And there's additional guidance if you're exploring that. Again, I think Germantown, that came up recently in their board because they're looking at their virtual program to make it a standalone. Again, our virtual is a program, not its own school, not its own, it's something we create access for, so we didn't go that route. And again, back in these days, there were significant dollars and shifts around that status. So again, there's no harm. I would just clean up the number.
So we'll renumber it, and also, if you go to page 46 down above it, just a section 118.55, it's not a parentheses, it's a,
Bracket,
Bracket.
Yep.
Mhm.
there should be a bracket around
okay.
charter schools.
Right.
That's fine.
Perfect.
Good call.
And then the last one for tonight would be the 343.6 instructional planning. Again, that's the wrong number. Take a look at this. I'd be seeking a recommendation. When I read this, it reminded me of that first one that we recommended removal. It seemed basic. It's around having instructional responsibilities and planning, which is present in other handbook expectations, evaluation formats, et cetera. So we'd either clarify and come up with a new number for that, if we're going to keep it.
Do you propose eliminating it, or you're not saying either way?
I'm looking for a recommendation from the board on that. It's basic. It's not in conflict with what we do. It feels out of place in policy. This feels like practice. It feels
Right.
like the evaluation document. It feels like the employee handbook. I don't.
So as a parent, if my kid comes home with an assignment that I think, boy, this is just a weird assignment, I'm gonna go into policy and see where this fits, and I think, oh, instructional planning.
Mhm.
Let me read that policy, and you read it, and at the end of it, you say to yourself, that didn't tell me anything.
Yeah, you
Right.
for sure. If you have questions about that, you should call, and it should be connected to the articulated curriculum. And there's a policy on having the curriculum, having the process, all of that. Like you said, this isn't, in my mind, it's not serving a purpose. I don't know, again, and it might be a holdover, originally developed in 1980, but this is present as expectations in many other areas. And then when there seems, or a parent would have a question about a conflict, this feels like a conflict, there's other places to look for it. You go right to the curriculum that's expected. And was the lesson that they designed in alignment with the curriculum, not this.
These 7 bullet points to me are just so basic of what teaching and curriculum planning, instruction.
Practice, right?
Yeah.
It's literally describing the practice,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah, I agree. That was my struggle too. I mean, you look at the words and say, well, there's something wrong with these words, but the value of the policy, I question, so.
And maybe this is best served to take this and look at our teaching and learning website around, like, here's our standards, here's our curriculum, here's some of the things teachers do to create, and it's more kind of context around some of those documents versus a policy. And maybe that's what we look at, and have Nancy look at that website and say, is this reflected there, so that people understand? I think that it would be better placed there.
Sounds good.
Okay. I said it would be a very efficient meeting tonight. I cut them in half, so that's what I had for us to cover. Today, we had a couple to look in deeper for, some alignment of formatting, some corrections of numbers, one new replacement, and a couple to sunset based on that. One that we're gonna dig in a little bit more and bring back for discussion at our next committee meeting to go through again. Any other questions, or?
Just from a timing perspective, next steps, the ones that we talked about tonight with some revisions or deletions, will we see those at the next board meeting for first reading, or are we gonna package these up?
Yep, I'm gonna package these up. It's, like I said, it's really nice. It's been well updated and maintained. We'll use May and start the 500 series. And then we'll wait as we finish our work here, and then package these and then bring them forward to the board. Gives us a little time, and then they can see it in its context. But we'll foreshadow for the board Mr. Ongar will in his update, just what the policy work was, and that they look ahead and review those as well. I know sometimes they watch the whole meeting, sometimes they just review current policies so that they can see those changes.
No, that's good, because if anyone's watching has comments or questions, it gives a little additional time for people to bring that up, so makes sense.
Thank you.
Chris, John, thank you for your interest in this committee. I have a feeling that if you show this interest on Monday, you will officially become a member of this committee. I'm pretty confident in saying that. And I hope you can see tonight, the committees, these are working committees. We don't make decisions at committees. In fact, the only decision we're really making is whether or not we're going to bring it to the whole board, which is where the vote takes place. Do we adopt this policy? There have been times where we send a policy back to committee at a board meeting and say, hey, maybe it's based on public input, maybe it's based on input from other board members or whatever. So these are working meetings, but they're important. This is a policy governing board. These are our policies. Laura, Joel, Jen, thank you very much. John, Chris, for being here tonight. Cinco de Mayo. So we will adjourn by call of the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. We're live streaming. We've already got Mr. Donaldson on technical assistance, given his background. He's
Thank you.
in charge. He was